The Sopranos follows New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano as he tries to hold together both his family and the family he is in charge of. Because of his therapy sessions with Dr. Milfy, we gain a great deal of insight into the psyche and headspace of a man as evil as Tony Soprano. Whatever front he has in front of the world, in front of his wife and children, his crew or his lawyer, having to be the sad clown, inside Melfi's office we see a different side to Tony Soprano which he isn't willing to show the rest of the world. Here he cries, he talks about how he hates his son, how he wants to run away with his nephew's girlfriend, and all sorts of things which he'd never say on the outside. Even still, it becomes apparent that the therapy sessions themselves are an exercise for Tony's narcissism. A clue early on in the show is when Tony remarks how happy he currently is in his life and he simply walks out of his therapy session saying he doesn't need it. The idea that Tony only uses the therapy sessions to make himself happy with his behavior is reinforced when Melfi talks to Elliot and reads the study saying that criminals essentially use insight and therapy to justify their acts, and it is in of itself a criminal operation for gangsters, which leads her to end her association with Tony. It's fitting that this comes in season 6 as this is Tony Soprano at his very worst, a time where he not only commits heinous actions, but seemingly has sailed past the point of even attempting to justify them, and now simply revels in them. Throughout the show, Tony uses skills learned in therapy to manipulate and dominate those around him, and by the time season 6 rolls around, he has become a horribly spiteful person, murdering his protege Christopher after he becomes burdensome, making Bobby kill after feeling insecure when he loses a fight to Bobby, causing the bartender Georgie permanent ear damage after beating him, winding Janice up about her estranged son when she makes progress with her therapy, and a whole lot of other things. Tony breaks off many relationships, and this is perhaps never more tragic than his treatment of Hesh. Hesh and Tony have both known each other years, with Hesh going back to the days of Tony's father, advising him and doing business. For the most part, he is a reasonable man. The relationship between Tony and Hesh is special. It's almost a father-son type dynamic, or that of an older, wise uncle. Hesh even replaces Melfi as Tony's therapist briefly in season 2, and the closeness in the duo's relationship is proven tangibly, with Hesh exempt from taxes from the Sopranos. There's a lot of giving and taking in their relationship. Hesh offers helpful advice on the Pussy Malanga hit. Tony gets Junior to lower Hesh's taxes. Tony is present during Hesh's issues with Massive Genius. Tony got compensation for Hesh when he's attacked by Phil Leotardo's men, and so on and so forth. However, their relationship starts to sour and bitterness emerges when Tony gets swamped with debt due to his abhorrent gambling addiction. Ironic, given his disdain for degenerate gambling, but after all, hypocrisy is one of Tony's key traits and one of the undercurrent themes of the entire show. Anyway, Tony asks Hesh for a $200k loan, which Hesh immediately accepts. But when Tony shows no sign of paying back or even mentioning the loan, Hesh politely asks about the loan, and immediately Tony becomes visibly frustrated. It comes during a conversation when Tony says he's happy being at Hesh's home, as he questions the agenda of his men, and he also gifts Hesh a much coveted cleaver cap, and then Hesh pops the question. So from Tony's mind, he's revealing insecurities about his men not being true friends, using him, and now Hesh is doing the same thing, wanting his money off him. It harks back to a line said by Tony: "They miss payments and start acting like they're doing you a favor if they give you anything, and then you gotta spend all your time hounding them." As with many things uttered by Tony, ironic. When a childhood friend owed him money, he destroyed his life. When he owed a man who's known him since childhood, he acts as if he's doing Hesh a favor. In any case, Tony becomes irritated, giving Hesh 3k there and then and saying he doesn't want Hesh eating cat food while he glances around Hesh's luxurious home. Later, Hesh visits the Bing and is immediately met with snide remarks from Tony poking fun at Hesh's Jewishness. In spite of Hesh's attempts to mitigate the situation with some self-depreciating humor, Tony doesn't stop and throws some cash at Hesh in a food wrapper. The tension worries Hesh, who begins to fear that Tony might hurt him or even kill him, bringing up his fear in a conversation with Eli. As he says, at what point is it cheaper for him to settle it another way? This leads us to a curious scene where Tony arrives unannounced to Hesh's home. Hesh is immediately alarmed, telling his woman to go into the bedroom and lock the door. Tony, dressed in leather black, is accompanied by his new underboss Bobby and asks Hesh if he wants to come to a boat show, which Hesh turns down. Hand in pocket, causing momentary panic in Hesh's face, Tony hands over some of what he owes. Tony decides not to stay, saying, "Next time I'll call first," which really highlights that their relationship has taken a downgrade, that Tony will now not be turning up nilly-willy as you might do with a friend. With the death of Pussy, Tony contemplating murdering Paulie on the boat, the fact that Tony offered to take Hesh to a boat show, and the overall tense atmosphere sends alarm bells to us as the viewer and begs the question, was Tony actually going to kill Hesh? Or at the very least, was he contemplating it? What would have happened if Hesh went along with Tony and Bobby? Tony's remarks afterwards in the car, about coming out all this way to pick up Hesh and him having a pissy attitude, suggests that he wasn't going to kill him and was actually going to take him to a show. Maybe it was an attempt to mend their relationship and move focus away from Tony's debt, and on some level, Hesh's refusal and his BS excuse offended Tony. At worst, he was considering not paying off the debt, as per Bobby's advice, but decides against it as publicly showing as boss he wouldn't repay his debts would cause dysentery in the ranks. Of course, Tony is a great actor and could be grandstanding in front of his subordinates to show how far he went for Hesh, but Hesh spit in his face. But it would be very ironic if, after all of Hesh's paranoia and the evil things we've seen Tony do to people close to him, that after all that he was actually trying to do right by Hesh. This is further emphasized later when Tony comes around again and actually pays off his debt in full, but at a time when Hesh is mourning the death of his woman Renata, a time when the money means nothing to Hesh. Tony's cold attitude and the fact that he doesn't stay with Hesh and share his grief really highlights how deteriorated their relationship became, all because of the rent. But again, that doesn't mean Tony didn't at some point consider offing Hesh. He's done much worse, and by that point you can't put anything past him. It could even be that Renata's death actually stopped Tony from killing Hesh, and he decided when he found out about her passing to pay off his debt to Hesh, gaining some kind of upper hand in whatever narcissistic power play is going on in his head, showing he's in a better place than Hesh and no longer having to borrow money. I mean, that's one interpretation of their final scene. It could be that the scene shows that Tony could have easily repaid the debt this whole time but chose not to, or that Tony has gone so far that this is the only way he now knows how to make goodwill, but that's a conversation for another day. Tony was not in the best place financially. Hesh had already warned Tony about the resale value of expensive boats, so is it really believable that Tony wanted to take Hesh to a boat show? Tony's reaction in the car seems to suggest so. And if he wanted Hesh dead, it's not as if Hesh turning down a boat show would stop Tony. But with his experience, Tony surely knows what it looks like showing up to Hesh's home with a calzone with legs. It's likely that this was some kind of double play, where Tony would ostensibly show Hesh respect by turning up to his house in person and in front of his men, offer him a good time knowing he would say no, but intentionally trying to freak him out as well. That way, in a true narcissistic style, he'd come out looking good and well-intended, but would still gain some petty revenge against Hesh for daring to ask for his money back. Tony likes to feel in control and likes others knowing he is in control. By being in debt to Hesh and Hesh coming to his turf, it makes him look bad in front of his crew. Hesh doesn't even have to verbally ask for the money, his very presence emphasizes the point, and Tony would feel emasculated and irritated as a result. He essentially returns the favor, coming to Hesh's place with his crew, flexing his muscles and showing how much power he has, reminding Hesh that he is a gangster and Hesh could disappear easily if it's what he wants. Hesh had the money thing over Tony's head, and this is Tony evening the playing field, showing Hesh what it feels like to have a gambler's anxiety, only he is gambling with his life. Even Bobby acts all cold in this scene, giving Hesh the dead eye. It's possibly Tony coached him on how to act when they got to Hesh's place to further mess with the guy so he can get a kick out of it. So the whole thing was basically a power move, him saying, "I could kill you if I want," not "let's take a ride so I can kill you." A little friendly reminder from your local neighborhood mob boss. Still, given where Tony's head was in this season, there's no telling if a conversation on a boat or a car with Hesh gone wrong couldn't end with Hesh sleeping with the fishes, and I think that's the main takeaway from the scene, to show us, the viewer, something that we never considered before, that Tony was very much capable of killing his close friend Hesh, or at least putting the question into our heads to show us just how low Tony has stooped, and that Hesh was truly powerless if Tony actually wanted to kill him. But I don't think he was seriously considering it, nor planned it with the boat show. On a deeper level, perhaps this links to some insecurities in Tony which Melfi never got around to extracting. As I talked about in my video, Why Did Michael Lash Out Against Tom? Part of why Michael Corleone talks dismissively to Tom Hagen in a scene in The Godfather Part 2 is because Hagen represents the final link between him and his father. He was closer to the Don than Michael was. He knows Vito would disapprove of his decision to kill Fredo, and a lot of other embedded feelings of resentment. Maybe in a similar way, to run from the guilt of going against his father, who once told him, "You should never gamble, Anthony. Let this be a lesson to you. A man honors his debts." Tony chooses not to face the fact that he's failed to avoid the one piece of advice his father gave him, and so chooses to kill the one link to his father he has left, having already cut ties with Uncle Junior. But Tony's relationship with his father is something we can discuss in another video. So what do you think about Tony and Hesh? Do you think Tony was actually going to kill Hesh? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching. Before we finish, I'd just like to thank my patrons, Nicholas Curtis, Daniel P, Kantes von Zarovich, and Matt Danko, and also my channel members, Michael Awatwi, Rikers, Damien Irving, Lan Deng, Joe Grossberg, Cam Medina, and the new On Goam 24.